תודה לרמי. הדובר הבא, גיא-פיליפ גולדשטיין, מי שכתב את הספר בבל שעת אפס. בכבוד.
Thank you. Thanks, Gaby, for the invitation. I'm Guy Goldstein. I'm the author of a political fiction that deals with cyber conflict, Babel Minute Zero, Babel שעת אפס in Hebrew. So sometimes fiction can be useful to imagine future wars. Martin Libicki from the Iran Corporation wrote in 1995, whether hacker warfare is the useful instrument of policy is a question that defense analysts and science fiction writers may be equally well placed to answer. Obviously, I agree with Martin Libicki. And so from the fiction writer, here are some thoughts on what is cyberspace and what can be the issue with cyber warfare and what could be required to win in cyberspace. Okay. So what is cyberspace? A right understanding would lead to the right risk assessment, obviously. So there have been a few definitions like this one from 2009 that singles out electronics and the electromagnetic spectrum. Let me narrow down to what I believe is the heart of cyberspace. Whatever the means, magnetic tape, electromagnetic spectrum, you're not in cyberspace if you cannot talk to a Turing machine. And for that, you need zeros and ones. The digital language is the universal language humans have created to talk to machines, to tell them to do computations or any other tasks. It dates back to the Industrial Revolutions, when humans started to talk to complex machines. Its early native speaker was actually French. It was the Jacquard loom with its punch card in 1801. And since 1801, this digital medium took decades to develop with a couple of important stepstones, just like the first automated computing machine in the 1940s at Bletchley Park, or the semi-automatic ground environment in 1950s, developed for Cold War purposes. One thing I'd like to stress is that software in this medium, software is the place where meaning is created. With the introduction of the internet, software has become the most critical part of the system. The internet was developed to offset a local destruction of hardware. So the worst long-term damage to cyberspace is actually a successful semantic attack. But cyberspace is also man-made, as was mentioned. It is in large part still operated by men. Company Symantec noted that 3/4 of security flaws come from human errors. On the other hand, the most powerful cyber weapon today is still the minds of a talented group of hackers. So because of this complexity, of this hardware, software, brainware part, it took 206 years for the digital medium to conquer the world. But so it did in 2007. At this point, analog information became non-critical. So it is an extremely recent revolution. It explains why Kenneth Gears from the NATO Cyber Defense Center in Tallinn noted that cybersecurity was not even part of NATO's strategic concept in 2000, and why we need to talk about it today. As Marc Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, wrote in a 2011 column in the Wall Street Journal, software is eating everything. It's true. It actually happened 5 years ago. Obviously, this affects national power. The architect of the US strategic bombardment of Iraq in 1991, Colonel John Warden, has suggested that a nation can be defined as a system of 5 concentric rings, ordered by strategic importance. First there's leadership, then electrical power and energy, then industrial infrastructure, then population, and finally military forces in the fields. However, the command and control system of all of these different rings have partly or totally moved into cyberspace in the last 60 years. It started with US strategic forces and the semi-automatic ground environment in the 1950s, but then really took off with a revolution in military affairs during the 1990s. Fossil power and other industrial plants moved to internet-based technologies for industrial control systems by the end of the 1990s. In general, IT communication, the first electronic router switches appeared in the 1980s, and since the mid-2000s, most phone communications are done via IP technology. So this obviously creates a new situation, and we mentioned the strategic effect on communication, finance, energy networks, government communication for leadership, military communication, or GPS disruption that could render suddenly useless whole class of smart weaponry or UAVs. So cyber weapons could indeed have a strategic effect. But cyberspace itself is also generating wealth for the rest of society. The ICT sector is today the largest of all in the S&P 500, and it's a critical sector. Loss would be huge if it was gone overnight. In history, security has always been organized around the protection of key assets and commons, land in agrarian societies, access to sea lanes and key input as oil in industrial societies. So it is today logical that the defense of cyberspace has become reason enough to go to war, what was confirmed by Pentagon in a declaration to the Wall Street Journal in June 2011. Finally, all these technological and cultural revolutions could of course bring large geopolitical changes. It happened in the past. Britain became a global empire in the 19th century because it harnessed first the world oceans and the Industrial Revolution. But who remembers that just in 1750, it was a very small European country with only 7 million people. So any new technological revolution brings new ways to wage wars and then new problems for defense. First, imagine that your country is cyber-attacked and plunged into darkness. Well, you may not know who's behind the attacks. Cyber weapons have these characteristics that they can be used without leaving a clear trace. Any aggressor can claim plausible deniability. A point made again this weekend when Aramco was attacked by the mysterious cutting sword of justice hacker group. Lack of attribution gives an obvious advantage to the offense. More fundamentally, no deterrence doctrine will ever be credible if the most basic capability, the capability to identify the aggressor, cannot be demonstrated. Second problem, cyber weapons can be used, we said it, as strategic weapons, but to the difference of strategic nuclear forces, which leave obviously no doubts to their lethal effects, with cyber weapons there is no clarity on effects nor taboo in use so far. We hint at equivalence of effects with military action, but there are no clear studies that would describe simple, recognizable, conspicuous threshold, what Thomas Schilling has mentioned as one of the key elements of the idiom of war. For example, after how many hours or weeks of blackout there is significant loss of life, any significant deterioration of police forces or collapse of industrial output. The question is tough because cyber weapons do not necessarily kill nor destroy, but they can degrade and instill doubts in capabilities. In 2003, the US Northeastern region, 50 million people, suffered a 50 hours blackout provoked not by a worm, but partly by a computer glitch in a General Electric software. No one was directly killed and economic impact was minimal. Without any military context, if it had originated from a malware, how should the US have reacted? Knowing that if actually it would have lasted 500 hours, then impact may have been extremely severe. And how about the risk of false positive? A few months before, the network of a nuclear plant in Ohio had crashed because of a slammer virus. If it had happened at the same time, nervous hands may have seen perhaps a link. Telecom are also essential infrastructure. In Warden's 1991 Iraq campaign, Baghdad Telecom Tower was actually one of the very first targets. However, as was mentioned actually by General Hayden, when Estonia, a NATO member, was attacked by pro-Russia cyber militias in 2007, internet communication were paralyzed, but NATO refused to define it as an act of war against a member of the alliance. On the other hand, a semantic attack on financial networks could have vast demoralizing effects. For example, if banks cannot be trusted and then if panic and bank run spread. Political studies have shown that banking crises shorten government tenure in democratic regimes, perhaps also in authoritarian ones. The flash market crisis of May 2010 or the computer glitch at Knight Capital Group costing nearly $500 million show that financial networks are vulnerable. They have also been hacked, such as Turquoise, one of the equity derivative trading platform at the London Stock Exchange. The rest of the economic infrastructure is also at risk of disruption. For any company, today's value chain operations are supported by major software vendors, from running production line to managing customers list. Unfortunately, most of the major software vendors have shown that they can be hacked. Besides the disruption, another risk is espionage. From Japan in the 1960s to even the US in the 19th century, industrial espionage has always existed. But now, the management advantage of linking all corporate databases has a flip side, the WikiLeaking of entire industries, sometimes just after one email mistake. An example here is the one of Byzantine Foothold, the hacking operation of more than 750 US companies by Chinese hackers. These threats to the economic infrastructure are compounded when a country relies on a few industries or a few national champions for economic competition. Samsung or Nokia accounts for more than a sixth of Korea and Finland exports. Other countries rely on main resources for export, like Qatar, whose RasGas, the national producer of natural gas, was also hacked this weekend. But it's even more true for advanced economies relying on high tech. In April 2011, Sony PlayStation Network was the victim of one of the largest network outages in history, with 77 million accounts hacked. The impact on reputation has been very severe. Often, these large national champions exert strong influence on national leadership, so they can become strategic vulnerabilities. Because of them, countries can fall prey to deception. Say that national champion of country A may ask the help of country B because of an attack. Country B would help benevolently, except the attack maybe would have started with country B and perhaps the help of country B. Far-fetched? Who knows? But it is interesting to see today many countries promoting world-class antivirus software vendors and at the same time not doing much against local hacker groups. Following hardened rings, beyond essential system and economic infrastructure, we have people. And psychological operations are one of the initial scenarios of early 1990s cyber and network warfare studies. All the more so today, since it has been shown that recent studies that rumors spread much faster in Twitter-like networks. But darker forms of coercion are also possible. The commercial power of tailored, targeted mass mailing could be used for mass blackmailing on the internet. In 2010, a Japanese virus, Ken0, was able to capture embarrassing screen capture of its victims and list web history, and then ask about $10 reward for destruction of information. Such a malware could target individuals with defense responsibilities, from reserve officers to politicians. It may cost way less than sending the female or male honeypots that were the brainchild of East German master spy Markus Wolf, and it could be duplicated by the dozens of thousands or even more. Individuals are also vulnerable, and each individual actually within those networks may create catastrophic scale effects. This is espionage and counterintelligence on steroids. The Byzantine Foothold investigators identified that a Smile Wi-Fi provider, Hyben, had also been hacked. Hyben is actually the Wi-Fi provider of Marriott International Hotel, and international hotels have always been a hotspot for spying operation. So what we see here is a vast ensemble of tools: sabotage of essential communications and logistic networks, degradation of economic infrastructure, espionage and deception. Nothing new here. These are the multidimensional tools of a strategic campaign. They leverage what Liddell Hart has called the indirect effect. The British effort toward the invasion of Europe is a good example. It included strategic bombing against German economic potential, sabotage, deception via espionage with a fortitude operation, even information dominance thanks to the hackers of Bletchley Park. And all that has been extremely important during the first month of the Battle of Normandy. But with cyber, all can be fused into a unified strategic action, precise as Stuxnet was, striking without early warning at 0 day. In cyber, covert and special operation may go from tactical support to actually being the very heart of strategic campaign. And I will just stop here.
Thank you.
Okay.